Welcome, everyone, to a very special edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. This is an episode that has been weeks in planning. We are going to be discussing the top albums from 1990. Did I say that right, Jax?
You did, totally.
1990. Our top 10 albums from 1990. To be quite honest, I think 1990 was the last year I studied any French, but I'm not sure. Yes, we have someone new to TVC. I don't know which corner he's in, but he's not new to TVC, but he's new in one of these calls. Yes. Mr. Jax Russell, all the way from the sprawling metropolis of Moncton, one of my favorite cities to shop for music in. Maybe someday we can do it again. So Jax is here, Will is here, Matt's here. We've all really gone through and done a lot of work for this one, picked out a top 10 list that we can feel pretty strongly about. And also honorable and dishonorable mentions. I think this episode is going to be a lot of fun. So let's not waste any more time. Let's start out with our honorable mentions very quickly, albums that we liked that didn't quite make the top 10. And we'll start with Will.
Sweet. So yeah, my first honorable mention is Damn Yankees, self-titled. This is one I really wish could have made the top 10, but after listening to all these albums again, catchy songs, but couldn't quite hit the top 10. Next I have Steve Vai, Passion and Welfare. This is another one that could have made the top 10, but since it was an instrumental, I decided to leave it off. And lastly, one that Matt will hold up for you, I have Megadeth, Rust in Peace as my last honorable mention.
Oh, okay. Right on.
Looks like that.
Nice.
All right, Jax, what are your honorable mentions?
Okay, honorable mentions. Albums that didn't quite make the cut. I have AC/DC, Razor's Edge. Almost made the list, but didn't because of Thunderstruck. That song was just force-fed to me, so I thought,
look at Will. Look at Will. That's gonna,
excellent.
That's a long-running thing with us.
All right, cool. Next up, this is going to look familiar. Steve Vai, Passion and Warfare. Again, it could have made the list, but since it's an instrumental, I had to give it a shout out. So I love the album. And lastly, this was kind of a last minute pick because I realized one of my picks was from 91. So I had to quickly replace it. And I chose Danzig 2, Lucifuge. A dark album, but a great sophomore album. There you have it.
All right, Matt.
I'm going to show you a few myself. I have 6 on my list. To be honest, I could have had about 30 albums on my complete list. So first one's going to be Billy Idol's Charmed Life. I have that one on vinyl and on CD. Next one, this might surprise some people, but Cherry Pie didn't make my list. It's actually not even, I'd say maybe my 3rd or 4th favorite Korn album. Got that on CD too. Just saw this one. AC/DC up until a few weeks ago. That's the only AC/DC that I actually owned.
Oh, wow.
I never actually got into these albums when they came out. This is probably the first alternative album I ever got into by Jane's Addiction, Ritual de lo Habitual. I love this record, but probably didn't get into this until college. A few years later. Same thing with Alice in Chains, Facelift. I had no idea these guys were even around back then. And the last one was Megadeth, Rust in Peace, which actually just fell to the ground. You've already seen that one anyway.
There you go. Rust in pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
The case anyway. Okay, so my 3 honorable mentions. One Will already showed you. Damn Yankees. I'm going to mix up the formats as much as possible here. Great album. On paper, this lineup should never have worked together. Jack Blades from Night Ranger, Tommy Shaw from Styx, Ted Nugent, and then Michael Cardelloni on drums. But great melodic hard rock album, was a double platinum seller, High Enough. Great power ballad, went all the way to number 3. Didn't quite make my top 10. This one I know we're going to see on Matt's list. This is In Excess X. This came out in 1990 on Atlantic, and this was the follow-up to Kick. I don't think it's quite as good as Kick all the way through, but a lot of great songs on here. And kind of an odd choice, maybe Bad Company, Holy Water. The vocalist on this, Brian Howe, sadly passed away earlier this year, but this was a big, big comeback album for them. It was a platinum album. If You Needed Somebody was a top 20 single. It also had Walk Through Fire, which hit the top 40. Just a lot of great, simple hard rock songs on here. Classic Bad Company fans don't like this era. They call it the hair metal era of Bad Company. Maybe that's why I like it. But those are my honorable mentions. Now we're going to get into the actual digits. So we'll start with number 10 on our list of our favorite albums from 1990. Will, what do you got?
Okay, so this is another album that I don't actually own and just listened to it the whole way through about 2 weeks ago for the first time, and it's Scorpions' Crazy World. It's very interchangeable with my honorable mentions, really depending on how I feel for the day. But Wind of Change really made the top 10 over the other albums. That's just a perfect song in every way, so that made the top 10.
Nice.
All right, Jax.
All right. So for my number 10, released on February 7th, 1990, I went with Primus. This is their debut album, Frizzle Fry. And I know a lot of people don't take Primus seriously. They kind of see them as a joke band, mainly because of Les Claypool's sense of humor and his little high-pitched voice. But
Great musicians.
Oh, definitely. I think that's why I like this album so much, and I put it on my top 10 because the musicianship here is just phenomenal, I find, especially for a debut album. Like, talk about hit the ground running, and that's exactly what they did here. And yeah, I never really considered them a metal band. I never really knew what to consider them, but this is bordering on metal. Like, some of the songs on here, they border on heavy metal, like Pudding Time. Pudding Time really comes to mind, especially with that double bass drums by Tim Herb Alexander, not to mention the in-your-face bass of Les Claypool. And To Defy the Laws of Tradition is a song that opens up here, and it's my favorite Primus song. It's just a great opener. And other favorites on here include, excuse me while I look at my notes here. John the Fisherman, Mr. Know-It-All, and Too Many Puppies. So yeah, it's gonna stand out like a sore thumb, but that's my number 10.
Very cool. My number 10 is a debut album from the Black Crowes. 4 of these singles were on the radio. I think everybody would know Hard to Handle and probably She Talks to Angels. I was kind of surprised that song actually didn't make it to number 1. Of course, the Black Crowes, when they came out, I actually discovered them through radio, just driving around with friends. It's not something that I saw on MTV Canada first. So I really like their blend of blues and hard rock, and they were kind of like, it was that time when you could kind of see like they didn't have any like hair metal stylings to their music. So I did try to play She Talks to Angels one time on guitar, and only to come to find out that it's in an open tuning, which is something I had no idea about. So anyway, I really like that record to this day. It's my number 10.
Cool. So my number 10 album is a third album. It is Cinderella's Heartbreak Station, which came out in late fall, maybe even early. It came out late in 1990 anyway. And Cinderella were a band that I was way, way, way into with their first 2 albums, Night Songs and Long Cold Winter. I didn't think as much of this album when it first came out. It's way, way rootsier than the first 2 albums. It's not as hard rock. You know, there's even some stuff on here like the song One for Rock and Roll that was almost borderline country. And I found that very offensive to my 16-year-old ears. But as I've listened to it more, I've grown to like it. There are some great songs on here. The More Things Change, Love Gone Bad, Love's Got Me Doing Time. The hits off of this one were Shelter Me, funny video, Little Richard was in, and the title song, Heartbreak Station, which I was surprised to find out didn't even make the top 40 because the radio played that all the time. That's the one, She Took the Last Train Out of My Heart. It peaked at number 44. Got a lot of radio airplay, but it didn't quite make the top 40. And this was it for them as far as selling platinum. This was a platinum album. It's got some interesting guest stars on here. Ken Hensley, recently deceased keyboard player from Uriah Heep, plays on this album, and string arrangements on some of the songs are done by no less than John Paul Jones, Led Zeppelin. So that's some pretty high caliber talent here. This is the probably the original cassette that I had for Heartbreak Station back in the day. It had a personalized label on it, and you can just tell by looking at it. I mean, it's as different as far as image goes, night and day. If you look at Night Songs with the pink album cover and their outfits, and really this kind of set the template for Tom Kiefer's solo work, but I still think it's a fine album. That's my number 10. Number 9 for Will.
Yes, so number 9 for me, I have Judas Priest, Painkiller. So my introduction to Judas Priest was You Got Another Thing Coming. So going from that to this was a bit of a surprise for me, and it really took me a long time to get into this album.
Was that Guitar Hero, Will? You Got Another Thing Coming? Is that because Guitar Hero? Yeah. Those games are great for introducing songs. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, going from Screaming for Vengeance to this, I really hated this album for a very long time, but just once I got into Painkiller, which is an awesome title track and just in your face intro, I really got into the rest of the album. It's just straight ahead rock and roll, fast guitars, loud drums. Just I fell in love with the album eventually. And that's my number 9.
Right on. Might be the heaviest one on our list.
Not
I don't
quite.
know about that. We'll see. All right, so my number 9 is actually the only one on my list I couldn't find a date for, a release date. It's near impossible. I tried site after site. No one seems to know the release date other than 1990. So I guess it's that rare. And the album is Perpetual Defiance by a band called Detritus. Now, Detritus is a thrash metal band, but more precisely, they're a Christian thrash metal band. Now, I'm not an overly religious man myself, but I've always been very respectful of people and their religions. And I have a lot of friends that are Christian. And when they said Christian metal, I was like, what's that? It's got to be cheesy, right? It can't be good. Well, don't judge a book by its cover, because they introduced me to bands such as Deliverance, Ultimatum, the Musketeers, and so on. And I was like, whoa, I had no idea that music that was so aggressive could have such a positive, even biblical message. So it really, I never look back. I like Christian metal. What can I say? And this one here, I found it. This is probably about 4 years ago. No idea what it was. Found it at a thrift store. It was $1. And I almost passed on it with the fear it might be death metal. It kind of has that look, a Rodney Matthews cover, right? And I'm like, I don't know. But I decided to go for it. If I don't like it, I'll get rid of it. But I ended up really liking it. The singer here is called Mark Broomhead. And he has kind of almost a James Hetfield type vocals at times, it's like he says stuff like fire. So that had me sold right away. Highlights here for me are Point of No Return, Morbid Curiosity, and No Mercy, just to name a few. And they only have 2 albums total. They had another one after this in 1993 called If But For One. And then shortly after that, they disbanded. So that's my number 9, Detritus.
I've honestly never heard of that band. Where are they from, Jax? Do you know?
Bristol, England.
Oh, Bristol, New Brunswick. Wow, they're local. What? So did you say that was a Rodney Matthews?
Yes.
Okay,
Rodney
cool.
Matthews.
Cool.
Yeah, famous for like Yes and the likes. So yeah.
Yeah, Nazareth's No Mean City is one of my favorite albums that he designed the cover for.
Yes, I'm also a fan of that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Number 9 for Matt.
All right, I'm going to move us along real quick. We've already talked about this album twice. Just squeaking on to my top 10. Number 9. Oh no. Pulled the wrong one.
Womp womp.
Give me
Passion and
one
Warfare. Will, get your Passion and Warfare disc. Emergency. There he goes.
Okay, good. Thanks,
That's
Will.
Steve Vai. What a nice little boy. I've been listening to that a lot, but anyway, go ahead. Passion and Warfare.
Yeah, that's good. That's the first instrumental album that I ever got into. Actually, even before, I know it came out after Joe Satriani's Surfing with the Alien, but that's probably the first one that I ever got into.
Cool. So my number 9, I found that the top 5 were easier than the bottom 5. A lot of these, from 6 to 10, they could really have been interchangeable. My number 9 is Queensryche Empire. And I wasn't into this band back in the day. I didn't get into them until I started going to college. This was their most successful album. Why is it doing that? This was their most successful album. Of course, it had Silent Lucidity, was a top 10 single, and probably their most easily accessible album, which is another reason why it's probably their most successful, or their, the highest selling album. The cover, and Matt and I have talked about this too, it's very strange, is that it's almost pixelated. It's not very clear. It's very early computer graphics, but it almost looks unfinished to me. Like this was, I don't know. There's a silver tinge to all of the pictures in here. And then this had a lot of radio singles off of it. They might not have charted like Silent Lucidity did, but a lot of videos, Best I Can, Jet City Woman, Is There Anybody Listening? Another Rainy Night. This was a big album for them. As a matter of fact, they toured for like 2 solid years, and then that's why it wasn't until '94 that they followed it up with Promised Land. Now, it was produced by Peter Collins, so it's a very similar production sound to Operation Mindcrime. I personally think Operation Mindcrime I like a little bit better, but for song, like this has actual songs on it. There's no concept here, and it's good stuff. So that's why that's my number 9. Will.
Number 8. Now, I'm in school right now. For the last couple of years, it's been hard to get buying music still. So this is another album that Matt will hold up for me. I have Winger in the Heart of the Young at number 8. Now, this is an album I've tried so hard to put it higher, but just after listening to it and listening to all the other albums, it got stuck at 8. It's about what you would expect for a Winger album. It's great the whole way through. There's not really a song I don't like. Can't Get Enough is obviously great, but like I couldn't put it any higher than number 8.
We'll be talking about that one later.
Yeah. All right, Jax.
All right. So my
Numero 8.
Numero 8. Released November 6, 1990. My number 8 is Coma of Souls by Creator. And for those of you who don't know, Creator is a thrash metal band from Germany. And Germans, man, they just have this way with metal. Like it's just, they got this aggressiveness, this aggression, not aggressiveness, aggression that can be duplicated or replicated. Like you can tell when you listen to German bands, I find. And this is no exception. It's really some hard-hitting stuff. I don't have much by Creator. This is, I think, one of the first albums I picked up, and I was like, whoa. It's some great stuff. Yeah, I got hooked instantly. So highlights on this are the Coma of Souls title track, Mental Slavery, and my personal favorite, Terror Zone, which is such it's progressive, really progressive track on here compared to everything else. And yeah, I love it. Highly recommended. That's my number 8.
All right, my number 8 is another debut album by, this time, Slaughter. This one came out really early in the year, I think in January. And I actually picked up the remastered version of it as well, actually this year. I talked a lot about Slaughter on my Instagram page. If you really want to check out a huge write-up. But so this, of course, was Mark and Dana from the Vinnie Vincent Invasion. And one thing I really like about this album, it doesn't, to me, sound like a first album from a band. It's got so much production and sound effects and stuff going on. And actually, so it came out pretty early in 1990. And before 1990 was over, they'd already hit the top 40 3 times with this record. So they were hitting pretty high with their first album.
They had a lot of experience. I mean, Dana Strum had been in the business for a long time. My understanding is that Dana Strum introduced Ozzy to Randy Rhoads. So yeah, he was a fixture on the LA circuit for a long time. So they were very professional. And as a matter of fact, they went directly, I don't think they did clubs back then. I think that their first major gig was opening for Kiss on the Hot in the Shade tour, which is when they were presented with their first gold record. So yeah, one of the last big success stories of the hair metal era, really, as much as I hate that term. So for number 8, it's unusual for me in that I don't typically buy soundtracks, but the exceptions tend to be ones by a singular artist. So this is John Bon Jovi, Blaze of Glory, which doubles as the soundtrack to Young Guns 2. And, you've got Emilio Estevez, Lou Diamond Phillips, Kiefer Sutherland, all of the cast of the second Young Guns movie. And this is a rarity for me in that it's an early 90s album that's not a remaster. This is an original that I happen to find. So this is on Mercury Records, which was Bon Jovi's label. They were kind of on hiatus, but I mean, this, I liked it at the time, but I listened to it not too long ago. It holds up really well. And it doesn't sound like a soundtrack. It's a lot of Western themes to it. Justice in the Barrel. Of course, Blaze of Glory was a #1 song. Bon Jovi does it in concert. I think it won an Academy Award for Best Song from a Picture. Miracle was the second single, and I think it hit the top 20. And the last time I listened to that, I thought this could be an Eagles song. I could hear Don Henley singing this. And so it's not hard rock like Slippery and Jersey, but it really pointed the way for what Bon Jovi would do. But for now, a good album. Some really big guest stars on this one. Jeff Beck, of course, famously does that incredible slide solo for Blaze of Glory. Little Richard sings on this album. Elton John sings on this album. This is the album that brought Aldo Nova out of retirement and got them to co-writing an album, which will, if we do a best of 91, will definitely appear in that one. So that's the front cover there. Sleeve. Picture John on here, which when Matt and I met John, he looks taller than he actually is. There's all the lyrics, and the record itself is just your standard Mercury label. A good album. I highly recommend it if people like Bon Jovi but never bothered getting that album. It's actually a pretty good album from start to finish. So, Will, number 7.
Yes, number 7. I have Pantera, Cowboys from Hell at number 7.
That's pretty heavy.
So, about the summer of 2015, I think. One of the girls I was working with said, "Yeah, I heard this song, and it made me think of you because she knew I liked the heavy music and stuff." And it was Cowboys from Hell, which is the first track, and just that guitar intro that really got me into this album. This is about as far as I've gotten with Pantera. But this album is great. Like songs, Primal Concrete, Sledge, Shattered, Domination, Cemetery Gates. Just the guitars and the drums on this album. The vocalist, his voice on this album is excellent, and I love this album the whole way through.
Cool. All right, my number 7, released October 23rd, 1990. A little band called King's X, and this is their third album, Faith, Hope, Love. Now, I discovered King's X in the very early 90s, thanks to a little film called Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. My sisters bought the soundtrack on cassette in 91, and they have a song on that soundtrack called Junior's Gone Wild. And I always thought it was cool, but never really looked into the band. And then fast forward almost 2 decades later, I started finding their CDs at Value Village. I'm like, I should check them out. I only know that one song. And I was hooked. It's nothing overly heavy, but it's, I don't know, you got the perfect blend of mellow and heavier rock. And if you like extreme, I think that's the best probably comparison I can give. If you like extreme, chances are that you'll like King's X. Highlights on here for me are Mr. Wilson, Talk to You, and We Were Born to Be Loved. So that's my number 7, King's X.
Cool.
That's awesome, Jex. I'm going to mix it up a little bit too with my number 7, the second album from Living Colour.
Cool.
Time's Up. That came out in August. I actually managed to find the vinyl for this just last year. Pretty happy to find it. So that was their second album, and it was the last album with their original bassist, Muzz Skillings. Apparently they had some creative differences. They separated, but they still remain friends. And that's an album that's got a little bit of alternative to it. And it kind of just came out right before our alternative stuff started getting popular. But again, like your King's X, it's got some progressive stuff and some really soft stuff and really heavy stuff. And I just love Living Colour. So they had to make my list.
Their 2 first albums are great. I love them.
So I love the fact we're getting so much variety on here. And Jex, the fact that you've got the dates these came out, that's awesome.
I came prepared.
Yeah. So, okay, my number 7, Matt will be talking about, it'll be much higher in his list, is Poison, Flesh and Blood, which came out, I think it came out in May or June of 1990. This is actually the cassette with the dripping blood on it. There are 2 versions.
Ooh.
I got the CD
My
version
eye.
that's got the dripping blood too. It's a Canadian copy on Capitol Records, and another big album for them. Of course, you know, Unskinny Bop was the big hit off of this one, Something to Believe In, Life Goes On, and Ride the Wind. 4 top 40 singles from this album, like their previous album. I think it sold something like 3 million copies. This was the only one that they produced in Vancouver by the late Bruce Fairbairn. Bob Rock was not engineering for him. He'd gone on to become a successful producer in his own right. So I think it was Randy Staub or Mike Fraser that did this. But it doesn't actually sound like a Bruce Fairbairn album to me. Like, it doesn't sound like Slippery When Wet or Permanent Vacation or Pump to me. But what I do notice about this is that I think what Bruce did is said, I want only your very, very, very best songs that you can come up with. And every song on this is great. The album tracks are fantastic. Brett's actually reaching a little higher with his voice. There's cool little interludes. There's acoustic guitar interludes. It's a cool intro to this. Yeah, this is my favorite Poison album from start to finish, for sure. And they toned down the glam look, not by grunge standards, but by their own standards. They toned it down quite a bit by now, kind of like Cinderella did. I mean, their albums came out almost the same years, but it's still very much, I mean, you can tell it's Poison. There's no question. It's still the original 4, but this is my number 7 and a great album. So now, number 6 for Will.
Oh, now I wasn't around in 1990, not even close. So I'm behind on all of these albums in terms of you guys talking about them. And this is one I'm not going to talk about a lot because I know for sure it'll be talked about later. My number 6 is Y&T 10.
I've heard of them.
Heard of them, maybe once or twice, you know.
Yeah.
This was actually my introduction to Y&T, thanks to Tim. And Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, always a song I always hum along to it, just randomly. It always sticks with me. Lucy, Girl Crazy, She's Gone, all very cool songs. I mean, there's nothing really bad to say about it, but I'll leave it at that.
All right. My number 6, released on July 24th, 1990. Again, this might look a little familiar to you guys. Pantera, Cowboys from Hell. And Will pretty much took the words out of my mouth. I agree with everything you said. Yeah, it's just a fantastic album. I always mistake it as their first album because in my eyes it's the one that got them famous, right? But this is actually their 5th album, but it's their first on a major label, which is Atco Records. So that's where they got the most recognition, and it's just flawless. And again, like Will, I'm not hugely into Pantera. I love this album and the follow-up that came after, which is Vulgar Display of Power, released in 92. I think that's a good one, a tad bit heavier, but they lost me after that. It's just not my cup of tea. But yeah, this here is just flawless. For me, the title track is a favorite. Other favorites include Primal Concrete Sledge, Heresy, I'm not too sure how to pronounce it, and the fantastic closer, The Art of Shredding. So this is my number 6, Cowboys from Hell.
Well, just barely missing my top 5. We've talked about this one already. Queensryche's Empire. So I have to give a shout out to my friend Dustin Caldwell. If you're watching, he actually got me into Queensryche. I'd never heard of them before. To be honest, I'm not the world's biggest Queensryche fan, but the first like 7 to 8 songs on that record are probably my favorite Queensryche songs, right from top to bottom. It started with Best I Can and all the way through. The Thin Line is the second song, which it's kind of a progressive song. I thought was an interesting song to have like in your second. Like I thought you would put the singles kind of more up front, but there's a song, Della Brown. I don't think Tim's a huge fan of it, but it's one of the first songs.
It's grown on me over the years.
Yeah, I remember. This is when I was starting to pay more attention to bass guitar. As far as Della Brown, the bass line kind of leads the song. Really, I mean, it's most of the song, other than some of the kind of ambient stuff. So I like this album a lot more than anything else they've ever put out. That's not to say I don't really enjoy Operation Mindcrime and stuff, but I remember reading an interview with Chris DeGarmo, and they talked about sort of Operation Mindcrime was when Jeff really took over that album. With Empire, that was Chris DeGarmo really trying to focus on the melodies and the music, not just the riffs and the screaming and that sort of thing. So, and of course they had the huge hit with Silent Lucidity, went to #1. Great record.
Cool. My number 6 has already been mentioned by Will. It's Winger in the Heart of the Young. And of course, it's their second album. That's why it actually is Winger 2 there. And I bought this album new when it came out. This came out in probably July of 1990, June or July. And I was a huge fan of their first album. And I like this album a lot. I still think I like the debut just a little bit more. But this is a great album. And actually, I like the fact that they included the image, the face from the first album and carried it forward here. Can't Get Enough almost hit the top 40. I think it peaked out at number 42. Not sure why. Fun song, great video. Miles Away was the hit off of this one. Power Ballad, of course, it went all the way to number 12. And that's the CD itself. Would love to get this one on vinyl, but so all this has in it is just the lyrics and photo of the band on the back. I mean, Winger, again, you know, one of the last success stories for this type of music and probably the most unfairly marginalized band of all of them. But that album comes in just outside of my top 5. And we have reached the top 5. So Will, start us off strong.
Yes, starting off with the top 5. I don't know if you'll all consider it strong, but I have Rat Detonator at number 5, which I also don't own. I just think it might be a little bit of some recency bias because Rat, for me, I've just recently gotten into, and I haven't heard a song from them that I don't like so far. The intro's great going into Shame, Shame, Shame. Yeah, just All for Nothing's a really fun song. I love the album the whole way through, and it is the first album in my top 5.
Right on. So my top 5 released on September 3rd, 1990. And again, familiar ground. I think Will and I are kind of on the same page on a lot of these. This is Painkiller, Judas Priest, their 12th studio album. And in my humble opinion, their most aggressive and maybe even their heaviest up until this point. Anyway, in 1990, I don't think they had released anything quite as heavy as Painkiller. So yeah, it was kind of a bouncing back from I think their last album before this was Ram It Down, I think, in 88. And that one didn't really do too well. So they came back strong with this one. And I love it. I was late to the Judas Priest party. I think it was 2010 that I kind of started. I had heard songs over the years, but I really got into them in 2010. Quick history. I was at a book sale at the mall in my hometown of Bathurst, and I found the cassette for Screaming for Vengeance. I forgot to take it out. And I found another cassette. I have the CD here, Hard and Heavy, which is a compilation. So I listened to Screaming for Vengeance, thought it was great, loved it. And then right after, I'm going to listen to Hard and Heavy. And the first track is Painkiller, which opens up with those machine gun like drums.
Double bass drums, yeah.
I was just blown away. I'm like, this is a whole different ball game. Like, wow. And I was hooked. I was instantly hooked. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into Judas Priest, you know, to make a long story even longer. So yeah, it's just a great album all the way through. Highlights for me are All Guns Blazing, Metal Meltdown, and Between the Hammer and the Anvil, just to name a few. That's my number 5.
Awesome. My number 5 is a little bit of Canadian content. Can you guess what it is? Boot Sauce's first album from 1990. This is called the Brown Album. So I actually would have bought this on cassette when it came out, and we didn't have a record store where I'm from in St. Stephen, so I had to go to a record store in the USA. And of course, they didn't carry this Canadian band. I kind of knew about the band through MTV and through Much Music, but I wasn't actually able to buy that album until we went to a trip to Toronto and I found it on cassette. So one of the interesting things about the cassette, it had the entire album on each side, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, I did
Okay.
manage to find it on vinyl a couple of years ago. I can't tell you how thrilled I was to find an original copy of this on vinyl. So some of the songs you might have heard, Everyone's a Winner, which there was a thing a
Hot
few years
Chocolate.
ago. Yeah, the Hot Chocolate cover. Somebody was saying that was the worst cover they'd ever heard in the world. And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. But they also did a song, Play With Me, which is an acoustic ballady kind of introspective thing, not to be confused, of course, with the Extreme song. But yeah, I just love Boot Sauce. Really like their first two albums. I think they only put out 4 albums in 5 years, from 1990 to 1995, and then they broke up. But that one's definitely my favorite.
Now, when Matt says go to the USA, he literally means cross a bridge.
Yeah.
into Calais, Maine, because I remember going down there a few times and going over to Record Town, which is a great store, and I miss it. So no, number five. I think this might be a contender. I've been kind of half keeping track. This might be a contender for one that we all post in some form or another. But my number 5 is Extreme Pornograffiti Extreme 2. Again, like Winger, there's a Roman numeral 2 on here. And of course, the famous story behind this, I actually think this is a counterfeit cover because the hype sticker is part of the cardboard. But a great album, semi-concept album about like greed and lust and all of those things. Of course, this had More Than Words and Wholehearted, the songs that they would forever be known for. This is a heavy, hard funk album, masterfully produced by Michael Wagner. Get the funk out. You never get tired of that song. Nuno Betancourt's guitar playing insanely good. It's a monster. It's quite varied. I can hear the Queen influence and stuff like When I First Kissed You and Song for Love. And it's got some almost some rap on here with When I'm President. And it's great. It's just a great album. It's totally deserving of its status. I just wish that this band had been able to carve more of a niche and people have a real appreciation for what all they could do and not just those 2 big songs, but whatever. Double platinum is double platinum. And because of my misadventures with ordering it and trying to get one for Matt, I've got 2 versions of this on vinyl. It looks like that. And then I've got one from the UK that looks like this. That's my number 5. Will.
All right, number 4, an album you guys probably haven't seen before, Extreme. I actually have the deluxe version of this on CD.
Oh, nice.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
Oh, so that CD looks like this record.
Huh.
The A&M logo. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, Tim already filled everybody in on this. So for me, this and number 3 are very close for me. It was hard to pick, but More Than Words is obviously a classic, especially when Jack Black does his cover. I think that's hilarious. Get the Funk Out is a great song. The guitar riffs are excellent on this album, and it's, as Tim said, a lot of different influences on it. So that's my number 4.
All right, number 4, released on April 10th, 1990. I went with Death Angel with Act 3. This is their 3rd album, hence Act 3, but it's their first and only album to be released on a major label, Geffen Records. So yeah, Death Angel, they're a thrash metal band. Once again, you'll notice a theme, a lot of thrash metal on here. I love this stuff, but it's more than that. You got so many different moods on here. Like you have a few slower numbers, and you'd think they might stand out or stick out like sore thumbs, but they don't. I find the way the album track listing is laid out, it's just a beautiful experience. Like it's just the perfect blend. And that's why it's so high up on my list at number 4. Slower songs on here, Veil of Deception and A Room with a View. Again, you don't even notice how much the tempo dropped because they just fit right in. It's just great musicianship, and it's talent and skill, if you ask me. So not a bad song on here, but favorites are Seemingly Endless Time, A Room with a View, Stagnant, and XTC. But basically, I love every song on here. So it's my number 4, Death Angel.
My number 4, we've actually already talked about. I'm gonna go a little personal on this one with Winger 2, In the Heart of the Young. So just a quick little story here. In 1990, that was a pretty significant year for me. Got my first girlfriend, who I actually happened to be married to at the time, but we were kind of inseparable in 1990. And so this album, although actually Miles Away is not my favorite Winger song, it makes me think about missing her when we had to go away on vacation, or we were separated. So I've got a lot of nostalgic feeling about that record, and I would love to find it on vinyl someday. So that's my number 4.
Awesome. My number 3 is, or no, sorry, my number 4. My number 4 is kind of, I think I'm the only one with this. This is an album that you used to see a lot in the markdown bins. This is not when I got it, though. This is Baton Rouge, Shake Your Soul. Debut album from a band, well, I'm assuming they were from Baton Rouge. They're definitely from somewhere in that area. Not a Southern rock band. Definitely a melodic hard rock band. Singer's name is Kelly Keeling. Got a lot of Coverdale in his voice, maybe a little Paul Rogers, soulful, but very commercial minded. There are so many songs in this album that could have been singles. The one single that did kind of get a little bit of radio action is called Walks Like a Woman. Great melodic rocker, dumb video, really stupid video. And this was on Atlantic Records, who I think were the label that signed the most bands when it just got overpopulated before the grunge hit. And so this album came out in 1990. It didn't do anything really. And I don't even know, I'm not exactly sure how I discovered this band, but they're one of those bands from then that only were around for a couple of years that I've kept. And I think this album still holds up. Just a good, there's nothing really heavy on this. And it's not pop, but it's just very melodic hard rock. And if you're into Winger, that would be a good starting point, even though there's no progressive leanings here. Maybe latter day Whitesnake, like late 80s Whitesnake. I think this album is fantastic. Like I said, you used to see it marked down everywhere. If you like that kind of stuff and you see it marked down, I'd highly recommend it. That's my number 4.
I think that's the only one so far I've never heard of at all.
Will, number 3.
Me, number 3, an album that's been talked about already. I got Cinderella, Break Station at number 3. Oh, Tim already talked about this album, but just the acoustic guitars on this album are great for songs like One for Rock and Roll, Dead Man's Road. Like, this album's perfect all the way through to me. The hair metal bands are really what I listen to the most, I find. I've leaned more from the 70s into the 80s now for my preferences. So Cinderella at 3, I had to put it top 3 for sure.
Cool.
All right, so my number 3, released August 21st, 1990. This is Anthrax with Persistence of Time, their 5th album and last one to feature frontman Joey Belladonna. He would leave the band shortly after, but he would return for their 10th album in 2011 called Worship Songs. But this was his last album for almost 2 decades. And talk about leaving on a high note. This, for me, it stands out in their discography. It's so different. Everything up to this point, there was a bit of I don't want to say juvenile, but just for lack of a better word, there's a little bit of immaturity here. As for this one, has much of a darker tone, and they tackle a lot more serious matters. And you sense the maturity on this one in comparison to everything that came before it. And I dig that. I think they did a really, really good job with it. As not a single bad song on here. Favorites for me are In My World, Belly of the Beast, Discharge, and let's not forget their fantastic cover of Joe Jackson's Got the Time. So that's my number 3, Anthrax.
Right on. My number 3 is actually a great album from my favorite band of all time, Australia's In Excess. I'd show you the vinyl, but it's been up. I've had it up on my wall since we bought our house 12 years ago, and it's never come down. So In Excess, this was the follow-up to Kick. everybody I think has probably heard "Need You Tonight" and "Guns in the Sky." So they had to follow up that huge album with another record. They had taken a break a little bit, and people went off and did some side projects. Then they came back, and they had quite a bit of fire in their belly because they toured on this album, and by the time they were finished, Musician Magazine had actually called them the best live band in the world. So they weren't just kind of like an image band. They were quite a really tight band. The X part comes from this wasn't their 10th album. This was actually the 10th year as a band. And it sold like 10 million copies. It had 2 back-to-back #1 singles with Suicide Blonde and Disappear. And I freaking love it. That's my number 3.
So my number 3 is an album that's already been mentioned. Matt and Will have already mentioned it. And I think Jack's already mentioned it. Did we all mention Passion and Warfare? We did, didn't we?
Did.
It was one of your honorable mentions. Yeah. So I bought this. Now, this is one of those cases where the internet is wrong. Matt and I have talked about this because I think the internet says this came out in February or early in 1990. No, this came out in May.
June?
At the early.
May?
I think June, because I don't remember seeing this in stores until after I had finished grade 10. Now, like Matt, this was the first instrumental rock album, first instrumental album I ever bought. I didn't normally buy things like that. It just so happened that I was probably at the height of my Whitesnake fandom. And at that time, Steve Vai was a member of Whitesnake. He'd also played with David Lee Roth. So I definitely knew who he was and loved his guitar playing. It's Steve Vai. And this album, he talked about it. I read interviews with him extensively before it even came out. So when I saw it, I'm like, oh, I'll get that. It's not the type of album I would have normally bought. And I think that's the case for a lot of people because it is his most successful album. It was a top 20 album when it went gold. These guys don't normally get gold and platinum albums. Steve Vai, Joe Satriani are among the exceptions that actually carve out that kind of niche for themselves. Steve Vai was actually a student of Joe Satriani. This album is, I don't even know how to describe it. It isn't really strictly instrumental. There are spoken pieces. He got his actual, I think, 6th or 7th grade teacher to do a song called "The Audience Is Listening," which is a fictional story of a young Steve Vai. There's a video for it, playing guitar in front of his classroom and causing all kinds of chaos because she wasn't expecting it to be so noisy. Yeah. Another video from this, he had 2 videos from this, which kind of speaks to how successful was a great melodic song called "I Would Love To." He recently released a 25th anniversary version of it, and I have that on CD, but it was the flip of his new album that had come out called Modern Primitive. But this is the original cassette. Of course, that's his famous Ibanez Gem guitar with the, well, actually, no, that's not even the one that's got the handle on it, but I'd love to have this on vinyl. I love the cover art, and I love the stories behind the quote unquote lyrics from some of these songs. This is, to me, this holds up. You have to be in the right mood to listen to Steve Vai, but this is the easiest way to get back in. And I have a lot of nostalgia for it too, which is probably another reason it comes in at number 3 for me. All right, well, number 2, getting there.
Up to the top 2. And this album, again, has already been mentioned. For me, it's number 2, and I have Poison, Flesh and Blood. So this is probably my 3rd favorite Poison album. I pretty much like them in order of release, starting with the first album. But this is just hit after hit. Ride the Wind is one of my favorite Poison songs, and this is one of the albums I remember way before I started getting into music or knowing which bands were who, but this is one of the albums that my father would listen to, so I've been around this album for years and years, so this is my number 2.
Cool.
Right. So my number 2, I'm surprised, actually hasn't been mentioned all that much, other than honorable mentions. But it's probably the biggest heavy metal album of 1990, released on September 24th. Rust in Peace, Megadeth. This had to be my number 2. Just a fantastic album all the way through. Probably their most successful and well-known album. If anyone told me they were trying to get into Megadeth, this is probably the album I'd suggest because it's just flawless and they were really giving it their all. This is the first album with their new lineup. It was, of course, Dave Mustaine, David Ellefson, but they they recruited Nick Menza on drums and Marty Friedman on guitar, and just talk about a well-oiled machine. Like the musicianship here is through the roof. Like they really gel together perfectly as a band, and I think that's why this is so high up on my list. It's I got nothing bad to say about it. Not a single bad song on here. Massive hits with Holy Wars, The Punishment Due, obviously, Hangar 18. Highlights for me are Take No Prisoners, Tornado of Souls, and Dawn Patrol, which leads into the closing track, Rust in Peace, Polaris. So I absolutely love this album. Rust in Peace. That's my number 2.
My number 2 is the second album by Extreme, Pornograffiti. We've talked about this one ad nauseum now. I do have a slightly personal connection to this. Of course, everyone's seen the More Than Words video. Nuno Betancourt, Gary Sharon sitting in black and white. Nuno's playing that beautiful Washburn acoustic. So when I was in college with Tim in 1993, I hadn't been playing guitar at that point, but when I walked into a guitar shop in Woodstock, saw that guitar hanging from the wall, used for a really good price, I was like, I didn't even play it. I have to own this guitar. And that should tell you a little bit about how much I love this record and love Nuno Betancourt. So Extreme, second album, number 2 for me.
Cool. So for my number 2, yeah, there other than I think Boot Sauce, there hasn't been a lot of Canadian here, and I'm about to change that. An album that I bought, I think, just at the end of grade 10. I have such fondness for this. I bought this about the week before I bought the Steve Vai album on cassette. This is Helix, back for another taste. This is my favorite Helix album. Sometimes it's Wild in the Streets, but it's usually this. This is actually a UK version. It actually contains the song Wild in the Streets, which is weird. I don't consider that part of the album. But this is just a fantastic album. They were a 4-piece at this point. The guitarist Brent, the Dr. Dorner, had left. He would eventually come back. But this is the last album with Paul Hackman. He tragically died on this tour. This, in Canada, this album did fairly well. The Storm got a lot of video play on Much Music, as did a really cool track they still do in concert. I think every show that they would do, Running Wild in the 21st Century. The ballad Good to the Last Drop was a top 20 single in Canada, brought the album back to life, and it led to another run of touring. I didn't really click on this until just recently, as far as I'm noticing that this is the first album since their first 2 independent albums that there aren't any covers on here. There aren't any songs that they didn't have a hand in writing in. There's co-writers on here, but this is all homegrown stuff. Heavy Metal Cowboys, the title song, Midnight Express, Wheels of Thunder. I love this album to death. Know every single note. It's one of those albums I don't even need to play, but I'll play it anyway. So that's my number 2. Now we're going to take, before we get to number 1, now is where we go over our dishonorable mentions. Will, kick us off.
Yeah, can anybody guess what this one's going to be?
Oh boy.
Jack's can probably
AC/DC as my dishonorable mention.
Oh, here we go.
Oh my God.
Album is awful. I can't stand to listen to it. Thunderstruck, if I never heard it again, would be way too many times.
I agree there.
Other than Money Talks, I've listened to this album once all the way through, and I can't get into it. I don't like it. There's not any song that sticks out other than Money Talks. It's not good. So it's a dishonorable mention. So moving on.
They need you on the Contrarians, but anyway, that's another story.
Oh wait, before we move on, I just want to say, in like 2 to 5 years, give it another chance. Now, I'm not saying you're wrong or nothing like that, but it'll grow on you. In my opinion,
Start with track 2.
The title track, The Razor's Edge, is one of the most underrated AC/DC songs. People don't give it enough credit. I think it's a great song, but I respect your opinion. Absolutely.
But my favorite album is Ballbreaker, so what do I know anyway?
I don't think I've ever heard that one, but there's the later ACDs have a little late on. Anyway, let's not make this a never-ending video. My dishonorable mention is the only soundtrack here. It's from a little film called The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, starring Andrew Dice Clay. His first film as a leading man after his stand-up act, and I love the Dice, and I actually enjoyed the film. But this soundtrack did not do it for me whatsoever, because the movie, for those of you who don't know, is about a rock and roll detective. And you would assume that the soundtrack to a film about a rock and roll detective would be rock and roll, but it has a lot of early 90s pop on here. It starts off with Billy Idol, that's cool. Then you have Dion, Sheila E., Teddy Pendergrass, Tone Loc, and then you have Yellow on here as well. So it just, as a personal opinion, the songs didn't really do it for me, except a couple of songs. You have Motley Crue with Rock and Roll Junkie. That was great, which was done for this movie and then appeared on their compilation, Decade of Decadence. And you also have, you guys are going to dig this, Queensryche with a song called Last Time in Paris, which was actually recorded for Empire. It was recorded during those sessions, but didn't make it on the album, ended up on the soundtrack. So those are the two songs I like. And you have Richie Sambora doing Wind Cries Mary, Jimi Hendrix song,
Yeah.
which is, I don't know, it's kind of forgettable. It's not bad. Anyway, that's my dishonorable.
So of course, for our dishonorable mentions, it's not like we could go out and pick like, I'm not picking Milli Vanilli or something here that I never would have bought, right? My dishonorable mention is the Blaze of Glory soundtrack.
Oh,
When I bought, okay, so when I bought this on cassette, I hated it. I love Blaze of Glory is fabulous. The rest of the album I hated. Now I will say, with a lot of time, I appreciate it a lot more now. So I won't say too much about each song, but I will mention, like, so this is when Bon Jovi had just taken a break, right? And he wanted to go off and try his hand at writing soundtrack music. I did find it kind of weird that, you know, when you buy a soundtrack album, you kind of expect some of the songs to actually be in the movie. And the movie's really good. You don't hear any of these songs until the credits. You hear Blaze of Glory, and I think you hear like one other song, and then something like from the score, but none of these songs are actually on the movie. So that's why it's one of my dishonorable mentions. I like it a lot more now than I did back then, but I hated it back then.
Okay, my dishonorable mention is, I mean, it's kind of inconsequential, but it's Cheap Trick, Busted. Came out in 1990. Now, the album before this, 1988's Lap of Luxury, resuscitated their career because it had the ballad The Flame on it, which a lot of like hardcore Cheap Trick fans don't like. I think it's great. It was a #1 song. Robin Zander sings a crap out of it. It did have a lot of outside writers, including that song. And what they did is they tried to recreate that formula on this album. And they had a top 20 single called Can't Stop Falling Into Love. It's not a cover. I don't think there's anything on here I like. It's all very bland and boring, and it could have been better. And thankfully, they've made much better albums before, but especially since then, and their last few albums in the recent years have been really good. To me, this album is one I had to have to fill in the collection, but I think it stinks. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's do it. Each of our #1 albums from 1990. Start us off, Will.
This is one that was mentioned very briefly, but this is by far my favorite album from 1990, and it's Warren, Cherry Pie.
cool.
So obviously, Cherry Pie is a classic song, and it's a great song. But for me, Uncle Tom's Cabin is one of the greatest intros and one of the coolest songs that there are out there. Like the banjo intro and just leading into the main parts of the song. I just think that song's awesome.
I got it in my head now.
Yeah, like the ballads on here aren't boring. They're not like, there's not too many of them. Love in Stereo, You're the Only Hell Your Mom Ever Raised. They're all excellent songs. So this is my #1 by far.
Cool.
Great.
Right, my #1, released on August 7th, 1990. And I'm going to surprise a lot of people with this one. I know it. And if anyone disagrees with it being at the top of my list, all I got to say is, if you don't like what you see here, folk out. Yeah, this is my #1 album of 1990. I think probably the only album that we've all talked about, I think. But yeah, I love it. It's just, the reason is simple. It's just nostalgia and sentimental value. Like, it's just, I get so happy when I listen to it. I just remember good times and listening to it with friends and the songs that we loved. And it it breaks my heart that a lot of people dismiss it because it's regarded as a ballad album. And yes, you have More Than Words on here and Wholehearted, but it's a lot more than that. And I think Tim took the words right out of my mouth. It's just a heavy album. Like Nuno Betancourt on guitar, he's just killing it. And again, great musicianship. Gary Cherone on vocals. I love his vocal work. So yeah, this is my number one. I'm just trying to. I had a lot to say, so I don't want to forget it. I actually like More Than Words too. Like I'm not a ballad guy, but this is one of my favorite ballads. I know every word. It's fun to sing on road trips. So I don't care what anybody says. Like I love that song. Highlights for me are When I'm President, Money, In God We Trust, and the title track Porno Graffiti. But my absolute favorite on here is Sooner or Later, You'll Be a He-Man Woman Hater. I love it. And I actually brought a few add-ons to talk about. I got a few singles. Well, singles, more specifically. This is the single for Wholehearted.
Nice.
Backed with Susie Wants Her All Day What. I don't have a lot of singles, so I'm happy to have this one, especially I try to buy anything extreme that I find. And this is the famous ballad. This is More Than Words. And kind of feel ripped off on this one because the B-side is, again, More Than Words, but it's a remix, which runs for like half a minute shorter. So I think, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, you have this on vinyl, a single, and it actually has a
and it's the UK version, and it's got Nice Place to Visit on there.
Yeah, which I would
same cover.
I would much prefer to have that as a B-side, but I mean, I'm not going to complain. This was a 50-cent buy. I also have, it's boxed up though, but I have a VHS tape that was released in accordance with the album. It's called Photo Graffiti, which has a lot of their music videos from their back catalog up until that point. It has some great interviews too, really rare stuff. I checked YouTube and I couldn't find it, so I'm happy to have it. And finally, I don't have it on vinyl, not like Tim, but I want to show this off. This is kind of the closest I have. This is their 25th anniversary Porno Graffiti Live, which I highly recommend. I'm not one for live re-recordings of albums, but they did a fantastic job with this, and I'm really happy to have it. This is a red vinyl. It looks great. It sounds great. Yep. They're in top form here. Obviously, the drummer has changed over the years, but even still, like it's just so tight. So I love that album.
Awesome.
So
cool.
Top 10 list for 1990. That was actually hard for me to put together, except for the number one album. This was always going to be my number one album. Poison's Flesh and Blood, of course, there's the uncensored blood cover. I did actually find this one on vinyl, an original one, quite a few years ago. Still has the little hype sticker in the corner there. This is another one of those records that came out in 1990 that I have even more of an emotional connection to, and not just the songs. Again, I remember walking around town with Ali. We were sharing a Walkman. We had a cassette with the album and one earbud in each ear, and just walking around town listening to this record. That's what it makes me think of. It's still actually my favorite road trip record. Anytime we go on a road trip with my family, like a long road trip, we get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I'm barely awake. And my parents are like, do you want to put some music on? I'm just like, sure, put this record on. If you know anything about the record, the very beginning of it's like this weird kind of instrumental thing that builds and builds and builds and builds. And then it gets really loud. And I always loved that because it scared the crap out of my parents every single time. But yeah, Flesh and Blood for sure is my favorite album of the year. I do have the 12-inch, what is this, like a picture disc? And on the back, cool. Valley of Lost Souls was the song I was just talking about. But yeah, can't say enough about Poison's Flesh and Blood. That's my number one.
All right, so yeah, my number one. This was not hard, and Matt's been giving me good-natured talk about this for quite a long time. There are albums that just grab a hold of you, and the ones that you don't need to ever listen to again because you know every single note, you know every single ad lib, you know every drum fill, every guitar lead, every vocal affectation at the end. You could just start it and listen to it in your head. 4-piece band, and sometimes it takes bands a while to really reach their apex, but 1990 was the year. This is Depeche Mode, Violator. That's for you, Matt. I had to do it. This is my wife's CD. She's like, "You're not going to make fun of Depeche Mode." I said, no, I'm just going to.
You had me. You had me.
Actually, Jex, when you had one written down with D at the beginning, I was like, I wonder. Anyway, no, obviously it's Y&T 10, which Will already showed you.
Oh,
This
look
is
at the time.
the vinyl version. And, these guys are funny, man. I got the 3 funniest co-hosts ever. I've talked about Y&T ad nauseum several times. I really don't need to go into much. A lot of people don't like this album that are hardcore fans. They tend to stick with what they call the trilogy, which is Earthshaker, Black Tiger, Mean Streak. But for me, this is a summer 1990 album. It's the summer I get into them. I saw the Don't Be Afraid of the Dark video and Much Music, probably the one time they played it. And I got hooked. I think it's one of their strongest lineups musically. They had Steph Burns and Jimmy DeGrasso in the band. No, nothing against Joey Alves or Leonard Hayes, but this was a tight band. And you hear the evidence of that on Yesterday and Today Live. Although, for whatever reason, Steve Smith from Journey plays on 9 of the 12 tracks on here. And that's one I didn't have on vinyl for many, many years. Was glad to get it. That's the sleeve, and this is the record itself. So yeah, it was a pretty foregone conclusion that was going to be my number 1 album. So great year in music. When I started thinking about my top 10, I had to stop for a second because a lot of the albums that came to mind were actually ones that came out in 1989 that were still had steam into this year, like Skid Row's first album, Aerosmith Pump. Those are 2 that just came to mind. But I love the fact that we had some common ground, but we covered, I don't know how many, should sit down and figure out how many different albums that we discussed.
Yeah, a lot of variety.
Yeah.
It's so many were on my list that couldn't even make it. So
Yeah.
So this was a lot of fun, and I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Thank you all so much for watching Tim's Final Confessions. Bye-bye.